Shit. Because they keep running out of storage on
the
me.
plant of birth. During this amazing flight, Etana grows quite terrified when he looks down and cannot see the ground anymore. In his terror, he lets go of the eagle's feathers and begins to plummet toward the earth. Luckily, the great bird saves him and returns him to Kish and his wife. After having prophetic dreams that convince him to make a second attempt to reach the heavens, King Etana is able to ask Inanna for her gift and blessing. Although a part of the story was either lost or destroyed over the years since it was first written, it's revealed that Etana does eventually sire a son who can take over the throne after him. His name is Balik, and it was assumed that he was born with the help of the plant of birth. The entire fate of a dynasty was, and still is, historically intertwined with the gods. Naram-Sin's battle with the gods and the Curse of Agade. As with most ancient stories, the Curse of Agade is quite older than its recorded history from the Ur-El period that existed from 2047 to 1750 BCE. In this exciting tale, one of the top gods, Enlil, had a battle with Naram-Sin, a prominent king in Acadia. He is the son of Sargon the Great, who started the entire empire. The son was very prestigious and expanded the borders of the kingdom through fighting and conquest. As with most prominent historical figures who displayed a high degree of might and prowess, he had many legendary stories told about him. Many people across Mesopotamia enjoyed hearing of his exciting life. The Nineveh Library, collected in the 7th century BCE by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, contained written copies of this story. What is the Curse of Agade? This tome existed as a fine representation of what's called Naru literature. This genre is characterized by the relationships between deities and humans. Although they have some basis in history, most of them are fictional stories or folklore. Some other examples of these types of stories associated with Naram-Sin include the Kutha legend and the Great Revolt. The Curse of Agade became one of the more popular pieces of literature associated with this prominent theme. It raised an interesting philosophical question because it depicted Naram-Sin seeking to discover why the gods allowed him to exist in such misery after Akkad city was destroyed. Again, all historical analysis reveals that Naram-Sin acted at every point as if these gods were a reality. It seemed that the king himself did not properly worship the gods and show piety. Therefore, Enlil stopped looking on Akkad with favor and blocked all other deities from putting any blessing upon it. Naram-Sin asked for reasons, fell into a depression, and begged to the gods for answers to no avail. At last, he raised an army and destroyed the temple of Enlil in nearby Nippur city. In the Curse of Agade, as expected, this attack angers the gods even more. The result was the destruction of Akkad, famine, and a total takeover by a group of people favored by the gods called the Gitans. This is not mythology, this is real historical account. And it was recorded exactly like this. Motive of the gods and all. Scholars get around this by demoting the notion of gods, saying they were people who became gods in an ideological way. Despite the general acceptance of this morality tale as truth, historians cannot find any real evidence that the king destroyed the temple or Akkad fell as a result of Naram-Sin's actions. Whoever wrote the Curse of Agade probably used this ruler and city because they were well known, and it would make a much more effective tale. Naru literature seems to have supplanted historical truth in some cases. However, historians don't believe in gods, and have painted themselves into a corner when historical accounts speak of them in real accounts. The goal of the Curse of Agade was to teach people not to upset the gods. It demonstrated how to have a proper relationship with them. The lack of answers from the gods, or a true explanation about what Naram-Sin ever did to make them angry in the first place, allows readers or people hearing the story to imagine their own selves and situations within it. Human suffering frequently has no obvious answer. The god Enlil simply decides not to protect the city anymore. He feels no pressure from any outside force, and he could have chosen to let Akkad continue to prosper. Researchers have suggested that the story was told to represent doubt of the legitimacy of Naram-Sin's rule. The structure of this piece of literature follows many Naru genre stories as well as many other types of legends, and fictional accounts of historical activities. It all starts on an ordinary day in Akkad, telling about how wonderful the city is and how rich it is from trade and commerce. It tells of how the goddess Inanna blessed the city and felt honored to be a part of it all. Then, conflict arises when Enlil shows his disapproval with the city in general. While a specific reason is never given, suppositions include a lack of respect for Naram Sin as king. This is linked in part to the god's support of Sargon, who he wanted to rule over Mesopotamia at large. The history records show no problems occurring when Naram Sin took over from Sargon. However, every conflict in a story must be answered by decisive action. The king, however, responds to the downfall of his city by asking the gods for an answer, remaining penitent, and praying for 7 full years. Unfortunately, Enlil does not answer. In the Curse of Agade, Naram Sin then gets quite angry with Enlil and the other gods, and takes action to get some kind of answers out of them. The destruction of the temple represents an attack on the god himself, and not just breaking a holy spot of worship and prayer. The temple there was considered essentially the house of the god, with a bedchamber, treasure chest, and more. A person who destroys or damages a god's physical home or steals his property will surely end up punished in quite several ways. The destruction of Akur obviously makes Enlil even angrier, and other deities join the cause to ruin Naram Sin and Akkad completely. The final punishment for a mysterious initial purpose, and the final sacrilege and blasphemy of destroying Enlil's home and property, is to allow a group of people called the Geetans to invade Akkad, who destroyed much of it, and to cause a famine and blight on the land. As with any ancient folklore, the Curse of Agade seems to have a very prominent lesson. Don't anger the gods. Uchu historical mythology. Uchu, the famed sun god, had many names, also known as Shamash, Samas, and Babar. Was not just the Sumerian god of the sun, but of divine justice. He's the son of Nana, the moon god, and Ningal, the fertility goddess. Uchu was the Sumerian tradition, but was also known as Shamash, or Samas, to the Akkadians, and they claimed Anu or Enlil as his father. In the Sumerian tradition, they're very clear that he's the twin brother of Inanna, goddess of war, love, and sensuality, and brother of Erishkigal, queen of the dead, and Ishkur, also known as Adad, god of storms. This tight-knit family were the main deities of so many epics in Sumerian and Akkadian. Achu is one of the most significant deities in the Mesopotamian pantheon, and appearing in the earliest Sumerian writings, circa 3500 BCE, after the appearance of Nana. Uchu is often physically depicted as an old man with a long beard and shoulders which emanate rays of light. In addition, he's also represented as the solar disk when he comes to the Neo-Assyrian period, circa 912 to 612 BCE. He becomes a disk with wings. The Law Code of Hammurabi, 1792 to 1750 BCE, specifically addresses Shamash by name and rank, and states it was Shamash who provided humanity with the laws. In Sumer, he's cantered around Larsa and Eridu, and to the north, in the Akkad region, he was venerated at Sapar. His temples were given the name of E-Babar, literally meaning white house or shining house. Thus the name attached itself to the god as Babar, the Shining One. Uchu, Shamash's wife, was called Sarita, in Akkadian Aya. She was the goddess of the dawn. By the Old Babylonian period, circa 2000 to 1600 BCE, was the patroness of the Naditu. These were secluded women who had devoted themselves to the divine, similar in some ways to orders of nuns in the modern world. The Naditu are routinely associated with Uchu or Shamash, because their seclusion was attached to his shining temples. But it was his wife Aya they worshipped and served. Nearly all the mythology of Mesopotamia regarding Utu Shamash speaks of his kindness and generosity. The first literature addressed to this god by the name Shamash dates from circa 2600 BCE. But he was referenced interchangeably as Utu or Shamash regularly throughout Mesopotamian history. From the advent of cuneiform writing, circa 3500 BCE, until its abandonment circa 100 BCE, covering a 3,000-year span. The symbol of the solar disk shows a circle with 4 points protruding toward the cardinal directions, and 4 wavy lines emanating diagonally outward from between them, representing the power of light, warmth, and reach of the sun. Some speculate this is the solstices and equinoxes with the further cross-quarter days embedded. Utu was vigorously portrayed as the god of justice. With the sun trailing across the sky, could obviously see everything that transpired on Earth. Utu Shamash was not only the bringer of light, but also the one who's seen justice. Ryan Moorhen, an expert on Utu Shamash, states, Utu represents the brilliant light of the sun, which returns every day to illuminate the life of mankind, as well as giving beneficial warmth, which causes plants to grow. As the illuminated sun was thought to be able to pierce every level of the earth, including the underworld, there was nothing. There was nothing, therefore, which Utu Shamash did not see the full perspective on. Historian and author E.A. Wallace Budge states that in primitive times, he was supposed to stride over the heavens on foot, but in later times to do so in a fiery chariot, which was drawn by animals driven by one Bunin. He was regarded as a gracious god, for he helped all who were in trouble, gave life to the dead, and set free him that was in bonds. Possessing the power to see everywhere, he knew all things and judged men rightly. Bunin is one of those Sumerian deities that gets little attention. More often, he's represented as his son, and is only worshipped at Sapar, Uruk, and Ashar as god of justice. Utu Shamash, being the son of Nana, was always listed in second to his father, but he was not considered of any less significance. His symbolism, as well as mythology, are among the most numerous in Mesopotamian artifacts, inscriptions, and literature. It's mind-boggling the reach Utu had over Mesopotamia. Hammurabi, a sagacious and precarious king, understood exactly how invoking the name of Shamash for his famed law code would give it more weight. This is not to say he did not believe this god did have power, reverence or not, but Hammurabi could have as easily chosen Marduk. Marduk was, after all, the patron god of Babylon, Hammurabi's city. The same goes for Enki as choice, well known as the god of wisdom. Utu Shamash was the obvious choice for Hammurabi because his presence was daily through the light of the sun. God of the Sun. Utu Shamash, the god of the sun, emerged every morning from the doors of heaven in the east. Two somewhat lesser gods flung open these doors for him, and he came forth. He entered his chariot to ride across the sky for his daily journey to the west. Again, 2 other gods opened the gates for him to enter. He took refuge in the underworld nightly, until his wife awakened him at dawn, and he traversed the sky in his chariot. For this reason, the entrance to the Mesopotamian underworld was thought to be in the west, quite close to the western gates of the sun god. In some epochs, it was believed Utu Shamash descended into the underworld at dusk to make judgments there. Utu Shamash. The judgment of the underworld is an intriguing minor departure from the standard perspective where the spirits were all equivalent. Death was the incredible equalizer who carried lords and peasants to the equivalent spot. There was no outline of a paradise or damnation, however, just a diminished domain where the spirits dwelled. In the Sumerian conviction, in any case, the souls were judged, and that judgment influenced their future in existence and the afterlife, regardless of anything. Orientalist Samuel Noah Kramer states, the deceased were not treated all alike. There was a judgment of the dead by the sun god Utu, and to a certain extent by the moon god Nana. And if the judgment was favorable, the dead man's soul would presumably live in happiness and contentment and have all it desired. However, the indications are that the Sumerians had but little trust in hopes of a blissful life in the netherworld, even for the good and deserving. By and large, the Sumerians were convinced that life in the netherworld was but a dismal, wretched reflection of life on Earth. All things considered, since the sun could light up even the underworld, it appears there was trust that Utu Shamash would venture into this netherworld and contact the afterlife. Like his dad Nana, Utu Shamash at that point filled in as a sort of extension between the living and the individuals who had passed on to the opposite side. It was accepted that nourishment and water and different contributions should keep on being brought for their souls since they kept on existing, just without bodies and still required sustenance. Utu Shamash's judgment of them always passed. It was clear the spirits still existed to be judged, thus the living kept on regarding them with honor. If the dead were deserving of recognition by the sun god, humans could respect and recollect them also. Utu Shamash is quite often delineated as a benevolent promoter, unreservedly giving the blessings of life. However, like many the most significant Mesopotamian divine beings, he was a totally acknowledged individual and was not above denying a solicitation which burdened him. Utu Shamash in mythology. Most of the myths featuring Utu Shamash emphasizes kindness and generosity. In the myth of Etana, which predates the reign of Sargon of Akkad, 2334 to 2279 BCE, the hero petitions Shamash for aid in helping his wife conceive at the same time that an eagle and serpent are feuding over ownership of a poplar tree, and are also asking for help. The god takes care of each request justly and carefully in the same way as in the Epic of Gilgamesh, he helps the hero conquer the demon of the cedar forest, Humbaba. He was not always so accommodating, however. In the story of Inanna and Hulupu tree, the goddess takes a young Hulupu tree, possibly a willow, and transports it in the city of Uruk, thinking that when the tree reached maturity, she would use its wood to craft a throne and couch to recline on. As the years went by, a snake built a nest in its roots. An indigo bird nested in its branches, and at its center, the band spirit of Lilitu set up house. When Inanna came to water her tree one evening, she found these unwanted guests. She sat down and cried through the night. At dawn, her twin brother, Utu Shamash, rose in the east and began his journey across the sky. Inanna called out to him and told him of her trouble, but he could not stop his daily trek and further told her he felt no need to. Inanna then sought the aid of Gilgamesh, who took care of the snake, drove the bird away, and sent the Lilitu demon away. Afterwards, he cut down the tree and presented it to Inanna for her throne. This was no selfish request on her part, because from the tree, she created the sacred drum and drumsticks for Gilgamesh, which he was supposed to use for good, but then misused for war. They were taken from him and drawn down to the netherworld. This story then sets the stage for the myth in which Enkidu, the comrade in arms of Gilgamesh, and his best friend descend to the underworld to bring them back, and after his death, Utu Shamash parts the veil so that the two friends can talk one last time. The myth highlights a central aspect of the personality of Utu Shamash, his involvement in the most intimate aspects of one's life. Jeremy Black comments on this after listing the god's aspects regarding the sun and justice, writing, "The third aspect of Utu was his direct interest in the affairs of mankind. One of the early legendary kings of Uruk is described as the son of Utu in the composition called the Sumerian king list. And Utu acted as a special protector of some of the later heroic kings of the city, for instance Gilgamesh. In the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, Shamash helps the hero against the monstrous guardian of the cedar forest, Humbaba. In the Sumerian poem, Dumuzi's Dream, Utu helps Dumuzi to escape from the Gala demons who have come to take him to the underworld. Throughout the epic of Gilgamesh, Utu Shamash is noted for his kindness and diligence in watching over the hero, and for this reason came to be regarded as the patron god of travelers and vagabonds. He also became associated with the highest of the gods, and even the benefactor of the gods, who provided them with a home. At one point in the epic of Gilgamesh, when Gilgamesh and Enkidu are setting out on the cedar forest, Gilgamesh says to his comrade, "Where is the man who can clamber to heaven? Only the gods live forever with glorious Shamash, but as for us men, our days are numbered. Our occupations are a breath of wind." The hopes and dreams, the aspirations and struggles of humanity were considered little more than a vapor, but Utu Shamash was eternal, and he would continue long after any individual life was only a memory. Although his name was forgotten as other religions gained acceptance, the vision of a loving son of a god, the light of the world, was not.